Okay, we are on the road, and I will have to remember to change the title before I disappear here. Oh, my. Yes, I forgot to change the title of the thing, which is going to make it a persnickety bit. I think I'll be able to change the bit after I finish the stream. Okay, that's what happens when I forget to press the right buttons in the right order. Launch our opening logos. Busy beaver that I am. Welcome to the world of Evolution Hour, the old talking head from Spokane, Washington. June. Let's see if we're getting our little screen back online. About a half hour late. Knee deep in Rocks 2 cosmology chapter. And a little thing that I encountered along the way today, I thought I would be sharing with you about transfinite numbers and William Lane Craig, a little hobby horse that has been lurking around in there. But we'll get to that in a bit. Okay. Remember, part of the show is our exciting World of Titans, our creationist dinosaur book. That is a splendid example of how not to do solid science, but a perfectly fine example of how to do superficial religious apologetics and retreading tropes over and over and over again. And then the part 2 relates to a thing that Joel Duff had been bumping into another aspect of creationism that I decided I would put up the whole array because it's also illustrative of the golden oldies approach to creationism. So, first off, about the Sarfatian taste stuff. They're still going on about preservation and how easily things can be done in a catastrophic context without really going into the specifics much. So it's a bunch of dangling material. This one, they've got a 2019 paper from Saeda, which is about trying to work out experimental ways to test preservation techniques. And they're kind of hinting that it helps their creationist case, but buried down inside of it, there's an allusion to the collagen claim for dinosaur fossils from Lingam Solier, Fiducia, etc., from 2007, the collagen fiber claim. And they also point out criticism of it. So even within that bit, and Saeta, of course, in a completely different context, have gone on to do quite a few criticisms of a lot of the soft tissue material in that. So it's a dangerous gangplank to walk out on for them, but I don't think they were realizing it even when they did their book in 2022. The next one is what I would classify as a plain bait and switch. There were issues about dinosaur depictions and inferences of material, and they were alluding to a case of where a protoceratops and a velociraptor were getting into a kind of a death throw thing in the Gobi Desert deposit. And there was some illustrations and things, and they were citing one source that looked like it was a technical one from PLOS.org from Chiapa 2003, but it turned out it was just a book review about another work. And so even from the framework of what you needed to know about the idea of reconstructing material from the point of view of a I'm getting a little stupid little window that pops up. No, we don't want that. Going to get my little X up and get rid of that. Even though there was perfectly fine papers and that on these issues, this isn't it. It's just a book review of a separate book where they just happened to mention as an example one of these illustrations that were involved. So it was a tendentious thing to begin with. And of course, naturally, you would wonder, why not just cite a technical paper on the actual deposit or one specifically on the construction of the imagery, the reconstruction? And they didn't do that. But the most recent one that's on it is from Barswald 2016, which kind of details with some of its taphonomy and that. And has references in it as well that would carry you back to the whole issue about how much of the fossils were preserved, how quickly, how much scavenging had been done on them or not. Was the possibility that it was hit by the sand slide, because it's in the Gobi Desert deposit, and these are Aeolian deposits. They're not flood-style deposits. So I suppose Sarfati and Tay were trying to stay as far removed with a 2003 source that isn't even about the actual detailed deposit to keep anybody from connecting up the little dots. So part two is a thing from Canadian creationist Calvin Smith. And in fact, Smith has been getting quite a lot of coverage from critics of creationism these days because he's all over the place. And he did a long series of blogs at AIG, the Shadow League, 9 installments on grumping on uniformitarianism. Remember, the term today is actualism. Polystrate fossils get mentioned along the way. There's a Kulturkampf swipe at abortion, I think towards the tail end of it. And the 7th in the series, Joel Duff had done a video on last November where he was going into how much it misrepresented the material. And the thing that struck me when I decided to go through and look at all of these posts is they're relatively glib, relatively source-free, and they're basically the same shtick that Henry Morse or Duane Gish could have offered in 1975 or 1980. It's not current. It's completely the standard material and tropes with new dates on them. And I think that gives a useful guide as to how wheel spinning current creationism is, that there's nowhere for them to go. Some, if they want to be anal retentive, can pile in footnote references and further examples on the points, but those are essentially nothing new. And they're certainly not going to be dealing with anything that conflicts with them. So now we can go into the William Lane Craig thing that came up. One of the examples that I'm dealing with in terms of, and I finally got my chart all straightened out, my little fine chart down the base of the 9 examples that went into in the book that are kind of like the heavy gun hitters, and how not fine-tuny a lot of them are, and how problematic a lot of the issues are. But that's beyond the layer beyond, because I'm bringing up also as an analogy of why the whole fine-tuning argument is a cock bollocks up to begin with, has to do with using an analogy from mathematics. The universe is mathematical in a surprising degree. And in fact, if you're kind of like a quasi-Platonist like I am, one could argue that the universe is what mathematics does for a living. But in that are layers of ambiguity and weirdness of anybody that it's bumped into extremely advanced mathematics will know. And it boils down to the idea of, is any of that designed? Is any of that negotiable? And one of the things that arises, my poster child here, children, are Georg Cantor, who developed the transfinite mathematics thing back in the 19th century. And then Kurt Gödel, who blew to smithereens the notion of absolute self-consistent mathematics. Doesn't mean that all of mathematics goes away. No, but that there are logical propositions within a logic, and you just live with it. And this dragged in issues that Bertrand Russell, who was hoping for some kind of absolute mathematics, was not working out. Now, you think that this is like 0 for 2 because both Cantor and Gödel were religious, although there's quirky little details to the self of their religion. But the thing is about the infinite sets of Cantor is that one of the little hobby horses that William Lane Craig bumps into on more than one occasion has to do with the whole idea of infinity. And it really bothers him that infinities could be real. He really treats all of transfinite numbers as kind of a parlor game. And in part, I think because he realizes that if infinities are allowed on the playing field, infinities plural, some infinities are bigger than others, it also opens up the prospect that you can have infinity in time as well. And it's kind of a philosophical Christian ex nihilo thing. Can't have an infinite universe going back forever. Our brains collapse at that point. And so kind of like to get around that prospect, he's really pushed his envelope on transfinite numbers way beyond the way he should. So he's brought the example up, not continuously in the Kalam argument, but occasionally. And he's even lambasted Graham Oppie in a back and forth they were having for not addressing the point on infinity that Craig was bringing up. Well, in a debate that he had with the late Quentin Smith from 1996, Smith just died a couple of years ago, actually. But anyway, this little thing popped up along in the sidebar area. It came up as a whole discussion because I was realizing the fine tuning, surprisingly enough, although it's kind of a little sidebar in the Kalam argument, there's not a huge amount that Craig makes of it. Maybe he's uncomfortable talking about the little fiddly bit details in there. And as we gather from the problems he was having with the mathematical argument, maybe that was part. People in the abstract audience, I suppose we're going to have to bring up the whole notion about how some are bigger than others. And how do you go about seeing an infinite? Really fun. In our little overlay, point of everybody are I'm well aware of the fact that everything is I see in the and so the are still holding on with our friend helping out. I greatly appreciate it and thank everybody who continues to plunk a little bit of their hard-earned stuff down to keep the old RA person of Donald Trump level wealth. Okay, had a brief little glitch. It looked like the connection was again. So, you do counting. You can start with the idea of isomorphism, which is matching a set with a set. Chest of drawers that you went, and you have a stack of oranges, and you open up the next drawer and put one more orange in, and keep on going till you run out of drawers, and you found that oranges are gone, and so you have filled exactly one orange in every single drawer. It doesn't matter how many drawers or how many oranges, you know as an absolute fact that the set of oranges and the set of drawers is isomorphic. They're identical. And you have functionally counted those. They're the same number. Well, you can do that with, imagine a chest of drawers that goes on forever and ever and ever, or the classic example being the Hilbert Hotel, the mathematician Hilbert used as an analogy. Hallway, and there's a room number 1, number 2, and a room number 3, and it goes on and on and on and on. Numbers, the nice, happy little integers. An incredibly large stack of oranges, or let's just go with guests at the hotel. You put one guest in each room. People keep coming in, and you put one in every single room. And by some miracle, you're able to do this forever. So you now isomorphism, where every single room is occupied by one and only one people. No people are without a room, and the rooms are one going on counting numbers forever. That means that the set of guests that you have is the same as n, the set of natural numbers. Easy peasy. So what happens if another guest arrives? Every single room is full. Well, do you give them the door? No, you move over one room. So you can to go to room infinity plan. There ain't no such room number. But if you have everybody move over one room, you have now room one open. Bring them in. The same principle would allow you if a big party of 100 trillion people show up. Just have everybody move over 100 trillion rooms. No problem. And so by these little tricks and maneuvers, you can, if you can rearrange things in a rigorous way, you can put more people into your hotel, which means that infinity plus 8 is the first order infinity that this thing is, the set of counting numbers. Throw in any finite number and it isn't getting any bigger because you can just have everybody move over. Now, there are some groups that are not finite. And it turns out if you have a sudden set of buses show up with, say, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, etc. All ginormous party goes on and on forever and ever, but they're all the negative numbers. Are you in a panic? No. Just have everyone move over to the room number double their own. That's now opened up all of the odd-numbered rooms, and that's enough to put every single one of the new guests in. So you have now doubled set in terms of the number of things in it, and yet it hasn't gotten any bigger. It's still n. Turns out also if you have all the fractions show up, even if you eliminated the fractions that are duplicates of whole number integers, doesn't matter to the problem, you can bring them in too by the same tricks. You can maneuver stuff around. Now, where things get into a mess is if you start having a bunch of guests show up that have the irrational numbers like pi and the square root of 2. Turns out, no matter how you maneuver the rooms, you are always going to have to leave somebody out. And that means the set of irrational numbers, the real numbers, is bigger. In fact, it's uncountably bigger. It is uncountable in the sense it can't be isomorphically related to the set of natural counting numbers. So that's the kind of ground rule that you have to deal with in dealing with a first order infinity of Aleph null and a second order infinity Aleph 1. There may be more elaborate infinity still come. I even find whether or not Aleph 1 is quite the same thing as 2 to the Aleph null power and R power, and what would those be and how would those function? Went bonkers. He had several nervous breakdowns in his life, and we don't have to resolve that today. But the fun part comes in from how William Lane Craig is slamming into this little problem. So he tries to discount the whole bit of the relationship of the infinities by contrasting, and he just basically is staying with an Aleph null countable. It's out quite rightly that if you you pulled all of the odd numbers out of the counting numbers, and he apparently doesn't think about the negative numbers, so he's just basically thinking positive integers, 1, 2, 3 on. Whether he's thinking of 0, 2, maybe he doesn't bother even with that because he's very vague. But if you remove all the odd numbers, you still have the same number of even numbers left over. So infinity divided by 2 still is infinity. And fine and dandy, it's great. But Then he pulls his little trick. He says, what if you were to eliminate all the numbers more than 4? Take that. That's an infinite number. And yet what you still have left are 3. 1, 2, 3. Well, apparently he's thinking that 4 is greater than 4 because he seems to have left out 4, but that's just part of his problem. And the difficulty is he's trying to do this as if addition operates in quite the same way in this, and that you can that what you're doing when you're adding and subtracting infinite sets is addition in the same way you do when you add or subtract numbers in a numerical system. And it's not really the same. He forgets the fact that he's dealing with sets, not numbers. And infinity is not a number, it is a set, which has a cardinality, an ordinality to it. It has a quantity in a sense, but the quantity of n is not itself a number that you can just add and subtract willy-nilly. What he was actually doing in his analogy was something else. He had a set of the counting numbers and a second set of the counting numbers with 3 of them removed, 1, 2, 3. So he has a set that's smaller in the sense that it lacks 3 elements, even though they're both the same size in terms of transdimensional, infinite ordinality. But when you take that set that lacks those 3 and you remove those members from the set, well, of course you have 1, 2, 3 left over because the set didn't include 1, 2, 3. You could have done exactly the same thing with any number of numbers, and it would be the same thing all left over. But that's not the same as plus and minus, which is the mistake that he was trying to do in terms of what he was actually dealing with was the removal of elements or the addition of elements in an isomorphic map. So the idea that, well, he's proven that infinity equals 3, no, because you're misusing what it means to do addition and removing or adding elements in a set context. It's an amusing little prospect as to why he's making this kind of little thing. Even somebody way above his pay grade and way above my pay grade, Gödel himself, who's religious, towards the tail end of his life, he did this attempt to prove God by dusting off Anselm's ontological thing, where because we can imagine, that's kind of boiling it down to its limits. And even somebody as brilliant as Gödel could glitch out. A bunch of mathematicians and analysts who have looked at the thing over the years have gone, yeah, no, there's little squishy assumptions thinking going on in there. And so all of this then relates to a bigger matter in terms of all that anthropic argument, which is the presuppositional baggage that we're putting into the case to discuss that may or may not be negotiably changeable. Had Craig wanted to switch infinite sets, he could have done the same trick and isolate pi instead of 3. But that wouldn't change the fact that pi exists in the sense that all circle radiuses and circumference are related by it. And e to the pi power plus 1 equals 0 connects that and the imaginary numbers and basis of natural logarithms and the additive and multiplicative identity in a way that we have no idea why that's so, or if any universe apparently can't ever be made, that wouldn't be true. And so this idea of something which is true because it's true and it won't alter based upon somebody's fiat. Nobody is ever going to make e to the pi power equal to 1. Sorry, it's negative 1. And no one's ever going to be able to do a root formula for a 5th degree polynomial. Not even gods can do that. No universe can be made with that. Then that reaches the idea about these air quotes fine-tuned constants, which you can play games figuring, well, all other things being equal based upon our physics, if the values varied and by how much, how far would you have to go before the things that we would like to have that happen in our universe would stop happening? Increase gravity too much, things clump together too fast. If you make it too weak, galaxies can't form, stars can't form, fine and dandy. But the question is, we clearly see they do form, and maybe there's no option. So the idea that you would have a master control panel, and Gonzalez and Richards's Privileged Planet literally uses that trick of a master control panel, and it has to be fine-tuned, and exactly that one combination is required to make life on the planet Earth, beyond which, in fact, no, they don't have to be that finely tuned. Not one of the 9 is like with razor's edge, like a millionth of a percent on either side, that kind of a thing. Not what the most fine-tuning is the one that's about a little less than 1% each way. But many of them go shooting off into many orders of magnitude. Oh, I'm going to be going to I'm going to be going to the bank and stuff tomorrow and things, so I will be gone for a while, but I'll probably give you a notice if you're not back by then.
Thank you.
Okay, just communicating with folks here in the den. I'm on the show here, so I'm telling them that I just had a conversation. Okay, things are complicated. Never mind. This is human being stuff, crap. What can I say? I could have paused the video or done some crap like that, but no, it's things happen in my world beyond the mere things of what you see on the screen, and you don't ever want to look beyond what's behind. Anyway, so the whole bit about that fine-tunability thing is a questionable assumption that any of them can in fact be fine-tuned to begin with. And it might be that they can be, but beyond even that, their control panel scenario was assuming that they were basically talking about gravity, strong and weak, the very fundamentals. But I mean, that those things have to be in a universe? Does the clumpy stuff that we call matter have to be matter in all? Do they have to be made of baryons to have gravity? Do they have to attract one another? Can saints have a stuff quality that allows them to fly up and look at birds? Are you arguing that birds require being made of baryons in order to be birds? So now at this stage, we're in the whole bit that somebody like Aristotle, who didn't even know about atoms much, would maybe not have thought about. For them, they had elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and that was fine and dandy. None of which, by the way, are actually fundamental elements at all. And so it was just their limited conception of things. But none of that can change. Or can it? And the argument is assuming change. And in the nothing change, all the fundamentals are repertoire on the dials, the adjustments of their divisors. Not merely adjusting gravity according to how strong or weak it is, but does gravity have to obey the power laws? Do magnetic fields have to obey the same power laws? Can you have a universe in which they can vary locally so that depending on circumstances, they can vary regionally from one section of space to another, and how much? Suddenly you have way more dimensions and variables playing around with, which the physics in many respects wouldn't even be able to detail. And whether or not you could have different things like squaggleflubes that make the bird-like squaggleflube creatures in a universe in which you can fly up to the bird if you're a saint, but you're caught on the ground if you're a sinner. All of this is dealing with that presuppositional baggage that, as far as I've been able to see, zero fine-tuning advocates ever think through. This is just not a problem that arises in their heads. And the thing that kind of got me on this whole issue was in compiling my chart, or the realization that I needed to have a chart, was the fact that so many of these people bringing up these things have not in fact been clear about what variations could take place with the fine-tuning constants. And it was like a pulling teeth to burrow down in the various technical papers and literature to get some benchmarks to fill in the numbers on my chart. And the fact that so many of them weren't dealing with that, they're just waving this like a magic wand as if it resolves the problem, meant that they had never thought this thing through very closely. And it was unlikely that they ever would. I gather there's a new 20th anniversary edition of Privileged Planet. And one of these days I may be able to get a look at it to see if they've made much of the changes. But it turns out that the really meaty things that they're getting wrong and questionable turn out to be buried in the footnotes, not in the main text, which is why I strongly recommend to absolutely anybody who wants to dive into this area to make it a point, for heaven's sakes, look at the back references on things, not just the surface details up front, where you can find peculiar, and we'll be highlighting them in the new book, internal contradictions and eccentricities of what's going on, or evasions, pointing at a paper that actually contradicts the position that they have just presented. Did they not read the pre? It's a fascinating little interesting. Oh, alpha resonance and Wing's mass potential and the efficiency of fusion, the fine structure constant, density, the tumor ratio was kind of funky because some of the papers fit, so it's the gravity same thing with proton electron ratio, proton, which means sometimes it's a number that looks big and sometimes it's a number that looks flipping the thing over. There's nothing in the universe that says which direction you're supposed to be dealing with it. And funny, a thing on the Hubble tension, just recently, every month, brand new paper, which is putting another little thing, problem of the different measures of the Hubble constant, depending on whether you were looking at it from galactic expansion or the cosmic background radiation issues, were seemingly coming up with values that were not colossally different, but from a cosmological direction, significant. It's a difference between like 68 and 73. Anyway, this new thing apparently is looking at more precise measurements, and they're coming down kind of midway between the two at 70, which is at just slightly below the thought of standard measure and just a nudge above where the cosmic background radiation direction was indicating. This will be very interesting to deal with. So everybody has to keep really up on stuff. I'm bumping into stuff all the time. This paper, I just stumbled onto it. It had only gotten into preprint more, and then it was just now printed in the Technical Science Journal under a slightly different title. So we'll be up to speed on that one. And by the time we even get our book into the hot little hands of everybody that wants it, maybe there will be some new material beyond that as well. And it'll be fun to see whether any of the gang that pays attention to these things from a creationist point of view call attention to it or not. There's a relatively small cast of characters in the creationist field that bump into this. You really have just one major figure on the old Earth creationist side, which is Hugh Ross and people associated with him. And then you've got a handful, as in one hand and fingers left over, of people in the young Earth creationist side. Jason Weil, you got Josh Hartnett, you have Russell Humphreys, who's starting to turn into fossilization mode, and then there's maybe a couple others that are knocking around the edges on it. So it's not a big crowd, And as we'll be documenting specifically in relation to the Answers in Genesis books, boy, they don't cover a lot in it. And there's relatively few people they're relying on to cover it for them. But when you spread out beyond the Answers in Genesis books to CMI and ICR and the Creation Research Society Quarterly and a lot of these other venues, you start seeing a bigger frame and also much more convoluted disagreement as to a lot of the details. Plus the fact that the creationists have no functional model for any of this stuff. They're grasping at straws, trying to tinker with the speed of light and a few other things. And of course, it's in part because they're trying to ram an entirely imaginary Babylonian-style cosmology thing that is not very detailed into a mass of technical literature. So it's a fun little operation to deal with, and there's an awful lot of hypocrisy and evasion, and every now and then some really rib tickler bits of people really overstating their cases and bluffing and trying to sell snake oil on issues. And then you can get also the fun point is that on easily a third of the various contentious issues that a creationist might offer, some of the most trenchant criticisms of it has come from fellow creationists. So they're basically firing guns at each other from various directions. Russell Humphreys's cosmology hasn't flown much, and Jason Lyle isn't exactly setting the house on fire either. But they're terribly confident. Oh my, terribly confident. And if you're only listening to one little niche group of creationists, they may sound like they're doing just great. But the moment you get outside of the box and start looking at other creationists and what they're saying and doing, you discover that no, it's all vacuous disarray. And hopefully our little listings of things and cataloging stuff. I'm, as you know, obsessive about chronology. So I love doing things in, and not merely in chronology, but also in magnitude. So where you've got, if you're going to be looking at the early universe, you're going to be looking at the data points in the order that they are occurring in the universe so that you can get a clearer sense about what the hell is going on. And plus the technical literature stuff and connecting up, because sometimes 2 or 3 different issues will be relating to the same little chunk of hi Vesta. Yeah. Because we've got, oh good heavens, like this brand new paper on they're going to be turning their interest to this particular group of stars and galaxies that oh, there we go. Darn, missed the start. Oh well, it wasn't all that long ago. I got started a little bit late. I only got started about half. To give you a quick recap. There's some cute little papers I'll be sticking in where they're misrepresenting the preservation or the whole fossilization issue, and then there's myth. And Joel Duff criticizing one of these things is a reminder of how absolutely brain dead, uninnovative creationism has been, where Calvin's from currently 2024 is doing the same kind of a shtick that Henry Morris would have been doing, move forward any. And then I did this little Craig and mathematics philosophy thing that's going to be a critical part of the anthropic fine-tuning section, there, volume 2. Once a batch of material, whole network. I got the printouts physically from years of information. Give you a clearer sense, weighing in on different categories of things. For example, that kind of like, you don't want to take a stand that it is or it isn't. I just put in today a design guy. He was complaining a little bit about the Big Bang because of light pollution. And other than waving a little teeny bit of Halton ARP, this was from 1998, he didn't really do much on it. And somebody takes a pot shot of something, and they never do it again. There's going to be some interesting sections on the what used to be a big deal in creationist pseudo-astronomy, and that had to do with supernova incidents, where it was argued that if the universe were as old as scientists were saying, and supernovas are going off, there should be a whole bunch of them, and that therefore the very late ones that were very old, and there's X number of them if the universe were old, and there should be 0 of them if the universe is young, which means you only one to disprove the young Earth creationist movement. And sorry, we've got more than just one. So that's reached the stage where some creationists have disavowed that whole line of reasoning, because clearly it puts a line in the sand and we've moved beyond it. So they've started to backpedal on it. And these are some of the incidences that we'll be going into in the book of the creationists changing their tune on things. So you've got two kind of polarities. One are the dispute areas where creationist 1 is saying something very different from creationist 2, and the only reason you don't notice it is because they don't call attention to this a lot in their upper level secondary scholars. The ones where groups of creationists have recognized that the old case was being made for a particular thing had blown to smithereens. The neutrino case is another one. Solar neutrinos is not a thing nowadays amongst the higher echelon creationist apologetics, that whenever you find a creationist that's bringing up the neutrino problem, they've probably been relying on somebody that ain't current, and they clearly haven't been relying on reading the little caveats in the creationist literature that says, don't do this anymore. The really fun ones are that you can find at ICR, CMI, and AIG that all of them will have put up little provisos on these things saying, please don't use. Although there's weird messes as to what you should get your information from. In one case, one of them refers their readers to what is ultimately another bad source. So it's just a mess. And it makes sense if they're flailing to try to plug the little holes in the constantly leaky dike. And part of the reason why more people don't know about all this stuff is because you'd have to cross-reference from one area to another. You'd have to see more than one post. You'd have to have a sense about the chronology of things. This one fellow on the supernova stuff, not only does he declare that the supernova argument is a bad one to use, but he doesn't go out of his way to name names as to what creationists were doing it, which is particularly coy because one of the people initially pushing it was himself. So it's just, there's an awful lot of incomplete mea culpas going on in this field. Frankly, I think more in this area because there's more of a mess of material. I mean, astrophysics is one of the most vibrant, energetic fields, and perhaps because of another factor, that astrophysics, one bad source to rule them all. Exactly. That's the mantra. I'm trying to popularize that one because it applies so rigorously. But that you've got the astrophysics end of things literally does the thing that your creationists claim you can't do, which is to see what the past was. Well, astronomy is nothing but the past. You literally cannot see Andromeda Galaxy today. You can look up in the sky at a pointed telescope at Andromeda Galaxy and have a crystal clear image of what it was doing 2.5 million years ago. You have no idea what's going on there today, unless you can get in a faster than light spaceship and get closer to it. So that time travel aspect is an element that requires creationists have pretty much kind of given in one of the ones that it's one of the fence post movers, goalpost movers, Oh gosh, I think it's Hartnett. But anyway, one of them I will be documenting in the whole area on it. Uh, that basically say no. Danny Faulkner. Danny Faulkner is the goal. He's saying, kids, you got to pay attention to this stuff. You got to accept that the cosmic background radiation is real. You got to accept that dark matter exists. You got to accept that dark energy exists. You know, that these are things that any creationist cosmology is going to have to somehow shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic to make them fit. I wish them luck, but I don't think luck is going to be on their side. They're never going to make it work. And so we can anticipate that there will be juggling acts, and you get this in Journal of Creation, you get little snippets of it in Answers Research Journal, you get it in various venues of pot shots, and some of the ones like David Kopej and all that will just have these little pot shots. And frankly, from his own perspective, Hugh Ross, he's not trying to overturn the modern cosmology, but he is trying to make political hay or theological hay out of the standard cosmology, that it's a point to the beneficence of the designer, that the constants have stayed firm. And there's one of his little guys there, Zwirnik or something, is an odd little name, I can never remember it, who's really gone off the deep end in trawling through, like, to offer the Bible quotes that supposedly support an expanding universe, and that the Bible, they're going on the whole notion of stretching the heavens. And what none of these people who try to make this argument have ever gone into is, what did the phrase mean to the people who wrote the Bible? And there's in fact a biblical literature on this whole bit, and the origins of the phrase and how it connects up to building a canopy for God and his place kind of up in the multiple heavens, and you get variations on this, in particular with the Talmudic literature, which we'll be citing stuff on. That it obviously just didn't occur to Ross and these other people bringing up this stuff, that there was a literature there. And in fact, they would trawl through, and they would finally find some little rabbi who gave a phrase that could be consistent with Big Bang, but that's not paying attention to most of them. It's just like if somebody were to point out that you do have Eratosthenes or whoever that was suggesting that the Earth would revolve around the sun, and that therefore you would jump to the conclusion that the Greeks generally thought that. No, they didn't. And so it would be a misrepresentation of the facts in that area. So it simultaneously was an area of dread for me to go into the cosmology area, because I'm just a lowly little historian. And so I'm making no claims about proficiency in being able to grapple with the higher level mathematics that most of these technical papers that deal with abstruse. But I don't need to deal with that. I can deal with it at the level of how people deal with the arguments back and forth, and in which areas there are certain areas that will have the dark will have a huge amount of uncertainty about. And it's because you're pushing out at the envelope of the ability to measure the thing you need to measure. So you get a little bit indicate that that no one's been able to find in sense. And there's a atomic physics, the huge particle menagerie that we have is fit into a particular little hole in the framework that's ridiculously successful so far. That kind of thing is still working around the edges. We're starting to get a little better data field, because like that new paper that's out is showing how a reevaluation of the stuff that's coming in from the Webb telescope and Hubble, clarifying the yin yang. Plus, I mean, they're looking at different kinds of and gray burst. That's another one that happens with supernovas and neutron stars and black hole collisions and all this other stuff. And each one of those gravitational lensing, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on that allows inferential things to be seen in the universe. And then you move over to the creationist side, and they're still prattling on about a phrase from Jeremiah. I mean, it's just so far removed and wheel spinning and boring, frankly, compared to the really exciting stuff that's actually going on in the physics. Once I'm getting over all of that stuff, I still got to tackle the rest of the chapter, which relates day 4. There's a big section on that, which brings up, variable speed of light and the whole issue about the discordant of all creationism is the fact that the Bible's description of when stars and the sun are made is after Earth and plants, and that's never going to cut it in our modern cosmology. And so everybody in this area that wants to rescue their Bible has to go through just weird headstands in order to make any of that, even among the old Earth creation aside. Hugh Ross and that crowd are fond of thinking that the cloudy atmosphere early in the Earth made it impossible to see the sun until day 4 of this vague thing. Some try to not be vague. You find in Gerald Schroeder, the Kabbalistic physicist, tried to make a logarithmic correlation of the days, and if you leave most of the data out, you can kind of make it fit. But and then you have a quirky little creationist who's trying the same shtick, and so he's ending up having the Permian take place, in ridiculously close time frames, and it's just those are little outliers. Setterfield, the little guy with the variable speed of light thing, he's had a tome that he and his wife did that rib tickler for side details, and not terribly influential even in the creationist community, but there they are. There we go. So let me put my little add-on, since I blathered on, filled up most of an hour. Isn't that delightful? Let me put on my advert for rocks were there. Come on, there we go. Put that on ye old pod, and then we need to have our share screen. It's supposed to be quite hot here over the next week or so. Actually put water on the lawn. Last week was remarkably nice amount of rain. Other areas clearly in the country are storms and tornadoes and yuck. Happy that we don't have those sorts of disasters here. The fires from Canada, air quality alerts, we've experienced some of that in the last few years, and to some extent locally in Washington State. Welcome to the 21st century, kids. There it is. And we allude to climate change issues and the like along the way in both volumes, but it's not a major focus. But future book, that's a different kettle of fish. And I've certainly been accumulating the information that would be relevant, and Jackson has as well. And so that will be yet another of our things to do. There's my little thing. Stop sharing. Whoop. There we go. That will be the book that we'll be doing after there. And then there's the evolution, origin, and structure of religion thing. And I suspect that may be a 3-volume thing. I have got material, including stuff on religions other than the God of Abraham crowd. That's one of the things that I think has hampered some of the discourse in this area, is that there's been the tunnel vision on Judeo-Christian and maybe Islamic, but not much else. But there's other religions on the planet, and many of them are as old and have a big pedigree. That whole Buddhist Hindu thread tracks back quite a long way. It's probably no coincidence that it's as old as it is, because the Harappa culture in India is as old as anything you would find in Sumeria. And then you've got a different kettle of fish going on in China, which tracks back into about the same little period. So you have an awful lot of other cosmologies knocking around and theocratic frameworks, plus all the different people on the planet that have their own frameworks that are harder to pin down in terms of the chronology, simply because they don't have a written language to be able to underpin it. And then the question mark hole is, what were human minds doing in the department in the millennia, tens of millennia, couple 100,000 years from the time our species emerges, and to what extent was some of this stuff even going back before then? So what is happening with our human species, and why we make religions, and what kind of religions we make, and which ones we do and do not, and all the rest? To where, in that big perspective of cognitive architecture, the religions of the last 7,000 or 8,000 years or risk, even though from our perspective they're incredibly influential and dominating. And you just had the big election of a new pope from the United States, and all of the ups and downs on that. It's a demographic fact that most people on the planet have some form of religion, but nobody has a religion that most people on the planet. So answering the question of why that's so, and what is common to them all, and what is disparate to them all, and why the disparities and why the commonalities, that would be a subject that Jackson and I would be diving into with relish, as well as all the sociological impacts. We'll be alluding a little bit to some of this stuff in relation to like the Inquisition and the racism issue, because we have to deal with it, because Jerry Bergman and that idiot crowd keep on trying to tar and feather, and the same thing with Richard Weikart over the intelligent design movement, try to tar and feather Darwin for all the sin, the Nazis and the Soviet Union. And as usual with these kinds of things, there's little tiny little grainlets of fact involved. But when you put all the pieces together, you can start seeing bigger perspectives in. And that one bad method to rule them all issue is a great important factor in what's going on, that allows you to perceive the iniquities of the Soviet Union and the iniquities of the Spanish Inquisition as manifestations of the same human character, even though one of them is allegedly religious and the other one allegedly isn't. So easiest way to tell when a god created by man is when the god they created is limited to the imagination of its creators. Yeah, that's an absolutely valid issue. And in fact, it always intrigued me, and that's one is why it's so much fun to watch movies, that biblical movies that have miracles in them. 10 Commandments, which gets trotted out every Easter, and for those who've kind of been skipping it, give it a catch sometime, if only to see the breathtakingly beautiful print they've been showing for the last few years, the same one that you can get on Blu-ray, because it was filmed in VistaVision, and it's just gorgeous, the process. This was one of the early VistaVision films, and the cinematography on it is just breathtaking, as opposed to the old video versions that had grainier prints and all the rest. But the biblical miracles, and for that matter other miracles, different cultures have slightly different tropes, but fire is an easy thing to imagine, so gods often do that. And water, they can think of that. They can think of rain. They can think of floods. They can think of, you can even see a fire and brimstone occasionally. If anybody sees how the embers flow during a great forest fire, they can kind of conceptualize that. So that's some of the repertoire. Lightning, there's another one. So you've got a whole bunch of natural phenomena that they can think of. But typically, rocks floating is not a thing that people observe, and therefore that kind of doesn't connect up into the bit. You get stray instances of levitation stories. Of course, you have the little flying cars, the Vimana thing that pops up in the Hindu mythology. You get the flying carpets in Arabian lore. So it's the equivalent of science fiction fantasy of thinking about stuff, exactly the same as trying to think about what a time machine would mean, or faster than light drive in Star Trek. It's the same imagination urge on it. What I know is Cecil B. DeMille, also a woman chaser and a quirky little bastard, and frankly. There's only one film that I have of his in the collection. That is The Ten Commandments, which was his go out with a bang. He had made the movie previously. And I actually also have the original Ten Commandments. I think one of the DVDs or something of it actually included that. And I think he actually improved it. But he was a ponderous director. He and Hitchcock were the first name above the title bit, where the director was overruling, or the producer is running the show in a way that makes them the star of the thing. People went to a Cecil B. DeMille thing in a way different than you would be going to a Warner Brothers movie produced by Howard Hawks or something like that. Yes, he was at Warner Brothers. Hitchcock was really one of the first full-out directors also whose name got on the title above. And so you went to an Alfred Hitchcock movie. Boom. But Hitchcock was a much better director, even though both of them you could be thought of as ones that preferred to have their actors as cattle who did their jobs and hit their mark and all that. But Hitchcock was able to yank, for one thing, he often had more perceptive screenwriters, and enabled some of the most vivid performances from people over the years. If you look at what he can get from a Cary Grant and a James Stewart and a from Catch a Thief and all that, Princess Grace, Grace Kelly, and like you could really get a tremendous, and Ingrid Bergman. That's another one that I'm thinking of. And of course, those were all tremendous pros. Whereas DeMille, I can't think of a single film that has a rivetingly good performance in it. He's got adequate performances because they were professionals, but there's a staginess and a stiffness to the Ten Commandments that, frankly, if you move over, a good one to watch as a paired set, because they date from around the same period, is that and The Robe. The Robe was just a few years earlier. It was the very first CinemaScope film, had Richard Burton and Gene Simmons and the like, and it was just really, really great, and written by a bunch of non-religious people. And it's actually devoid of miracles. And yet it's a terribly reverential motion picture. In fact, it's to some extent, since one of the writers was a soon-to-be blacklisted communist, there's actually kind of an undercurrent metaphor about the prejudice of the House Un-American Activities Committee in the way that Caligula is demanding obedience and authority from the Christians. So that makes a much more interesting, riveting thing. Plus the famous bit about how Richard Burton, this was one of his early American films, and he was just really impressed with how much emotion that Victor Mature was pulling out for this movie. And he is, how do you do that? I think about how much money they're paying me. It's actually one of Victor Mature's best performances. He could be kind of a little bit of a stick performer in that as well. And he was often in biblical sword and sandal epics in that as well. But in The Robe, it's really fun to watch. It's got some good little bits. Plus, a rip-snortingly good score by Alfred Newman. That was one of his favorite scores. He was immensely proud of the music that he did for The Robe, and you'll never be able to get it out of your head. Whereas, although Elmer Bernstein wrote a big, massive stereophonic score for Ten Commandments, the best stuff from him will be from later movies like The Great Escape or Ghostbusters, for that matter. So anyway, there we are. There's a wacky little bit. For what I know, Cecil DeMille, yes. And he was also the father of Agnes DeMille, the choreographer. And there's a long, fascinating story about other areas. But anyway, I'm over an hour. I don't want to go on forever and ever and ever on it. So everybody stay very, very safe in wherever you are. And bear in mind that we are in the calm before the storm on so many little areas in the next few years. And enjoy the summertime because the autumn may be a little bit bumpy. So anyway, we'll be here next week. That will be another Casey Luskin week. And I'll maybe squeak in, depending on the moods of things, little blurbs about the stuff that I'm uncovering for the new Rocks Were There volume, because some of the stuff I think is salient to a lot of little issues and fun, even though there won't be obviously any direct references to it in the linkages, because it's going to be in the book. So anyway, kids, stay safe, watch out for the wooden penguins, and we will see you all next week.